Good evening. We're going to get back into running a review of the Old Testament, and hopefully in this review we're picking up on things, maybe seeing some things that as we studied through it, maybe we're making some connections that we hadn't made before, and seeing some things that perhaps we might have overlooked. And so far, we've made our way from the creation and fall all the way up through the time of the United Kingdom, is what we call it. Really, originally, it was just the kingdom when they finally had kings. And we have so far covered 4 of the 5 key passages of the Old Testament. Those being, after creation, obviously, Genesis chapter 3, where you have the fall that takes place, which is what creates the problem that needs to be solved. As man has now been separated from God, Genesis chapter 12, it's the very first time that God chooses a single individual to begin the process of restoration, where he's going to create one nation of the many nations in order to be that very specific priesthood, a nation of priests, a royal nation, so that from them the priest, the high priest of the priesthood, is going to come eventually, and he is the one who's going to serve to bring salvation to all. Remember Genesis chapter 12, the promise, the land, the nation, and the seed. And the seed promise was for whose benefit? Just Israel's? Yeah, in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Or as it's repeated in chapter 22, in you all the nations, or in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. In Exodus 24, that nation enters into a covenant with God, and they ratify that covenant. They become a nation instead of just a bunch of peoples who just happen to have the same great-great-great-granddaddy. Now they're actually a nation before God. And then 2 Samuel chapter 7 is a promise made to whom? All right, a promise made to David. David said, I want to build you a house. And God says, well, no, not you, but I will what? I will build you a house. And so the promise given to David is that he would have a descendant on the throne in Jerusalem for the entirety of that kingdom, is the idea, that there would be a descendant on the throne forever, or at least the forever of that kingdom, and that points forward, once again, as we're going to see, to something greater. All right, so we have made our way through the time period of the Judges. We have the 3 kings. Who are the 3 kings? Okay, Saul, David, Solomon. And once we get to the end of Solomon's time frame, we ended talking about this guy last week. Who then is set to take over? Okay, a guy named Rehoboam is going to be the next king. And we mentioned it before we dismissed last time. But when everybody came together to make him a king, what choice did he have before him? All right, the people said, look, your father was just horrible. He hard-pressed us in service. Things were bad. We didn't like it. If you would go easy on us, we will serve you. So, who does he seek counsel from? All right, that's excellent, Joshua. That's exactly right. He says, go away for 3 days. Let me think about this. And then he first seeks counsel from the wise men that his father, the wisest person in the world, these are the guys he went to and asked advice. They're probably pretty smart, right? He goes to them, and what do they say? Do it. Exactly right, Eliza. Do it. Listen to them. If you will do this, they will serve you, and everything's going to be great. And as Joshua says, he then goes to his friends. What's their advice? Yeah, you give them an inch, they'll what? They'll take a mile. You have to be firm from the very beginning. You let them know. You say, my father disciplined you with whips. I'm going to use what? Scorpions. So it's going to be worse. And he tells that, and what do the people say? Yeah, the people from especially the northern tribes, they say, what lot do we have with David? To your tents, O Israel. And that's a phrase that's actually repeated from before. They'd used that phrase before when you had tension between the north and the south, but this is it. This is the dividing line that takes place where you have now a split into two different kingdoms. And who's the king of the northern kingdom? All right, Jeroboam. Do we know who Jeroboam is before this moment? Yeah, when does he first arrive onto the scene? Okay, when Solomon is still alive, in the chapter before, remember chapter 12 is the chapter of the division, 1 Kings chapter 12. So in chapter 11, when Solomon is still around, there was a prophet. Anybody remember the prophet? Yeah, Ahijah. Ahijah the prophet comes to Jeroboam and says, hey, you are going to receive 10 tribes, and they are going to be a kingdom that you will rule over. And remember, he took a garment and ripped it into 12 pieces and did all of that. And so Jeroboam knows that he's going to reign, that he's going to be king. When Solomon got wind of that, though, Jeroboam had to run, and he had to flee and hide in Egypt until the king died. And then down in the south, who's the king? All right, so Rehoboam maintains his presence on the throne. So now we have the line of David. Why is the line not just simply taken, the whole kingdom taken from Rehoboam and given to Jeroboam? Yeah, remember this promise? This is the promise that he made to David. I'm going to keep a descendant, one of your descendants, on the throne. So he's not just going to take the throne away from David's line. He's going to keep Rehoboam there in Judah. But now we have what's called a divided kingdom. Jeroboam takes the reins of the kingdom up north. And do things go well? Could they have? Yes, they absolutely could have. Remember, when Ahijah the prophet came to Jeroboam, he said to him, look, if you will do what David did, if you will but serve me and follow me the way that David followed me, I will bless you with a kingdom like David's. I mean, in essence, he makes the very same promise. I'll give you a kingdom, and your descendants will be on this throne forever. He gives him the same promise, but what's different? All right, it's conditional. 2 Samuel 7 is not conditional. There's no conditional statement. There's no if, then in 2 Samuel chapter 7. In 1 Kings chapter 11, it's absolutely conditional. If you will do this, then you will have this kingdom. Does Jeroboam do that? No. In fact, the very first thing that Jeroboam does is what? Okay, hold on, Isaac. What were you saying, Eliza? I'm sorry. Say it again. Louder. The 2 golden calves. Yep, that's exactly right. Why does he do that? Why does Jeroboam do that? Okay. All right. Hold on just a second, Isaac. I'm going to have you just not answer for just a little bit, all right? Because you're nailing them so well, all right? But we got other people that are wanting to jump in as well. Jan, what were you going to say? Okay, he doesn't want the people going down. He's afraid they'll lose power. Ryan, what were you going to say? Okay. All right. All right, Samuel? Okay. All right. Very good. I like your terminology, the lower kingdom. As we look at it geographically for us, you have the upper and then the lower, and you kind of have a line here. Approximately, this X is Jerusalem, by the way. All right, but yeah, Kelly. Yep.
The calf at Sinai wasn't some pagan god. It was supposed to represent God. So
Yep.
he went back to that.
Yep. Yeah, and it's not. I mean, yes, he absolutely chooses the same, and I'm actually bolstering that because the wording that he uses is the exact same wording that Aaron uses, like verbatim, word for word. Behold your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, or behold your gods, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Both of those are translated from the exact same words. For us, we put an S on the end, it makes it plural, but the word for God is already a plural word. So it could be translated singular or plural, both. So he says the exact same things that Aaron said. And these are the things, by the way, those connecting points where we're supposed to make those connections. And we're supposed to read these stories side by side one another and to say, okay, how do these compare and contrast with each other? But why? Why would the people go down to the lower kingdom, as Samuel said? Say that again, Eliza. Okay, because the temple is there. Again, why does that matter? Yeah, Ryan?
Because they're instructed to go down to the temple once a year, right? Or is it 7 years? I can't remember. Anyway, they're instructed to go down to the temple periodically to offer sacrifices.
Yeah.
Or to have the priests offer sacrifices on their behalf. And there are certain events and feasts and whatever for them that they needed to go down and basically commune with God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. They're still worshiping Yahweh. They're still following the law of Moses, and that requires that they go down to Jerusalem to the temple. That's where they offer their sacrifices. It's where they do their feasts. There's so many reasons why they have to come here to Jerusalem in order to go to the temple to fulfill their obligations for their God. So what is Jeroboam afraid of? They go down to the temple, and Samuel said it earlier, they start to think what? It's not so bad. Why did we break off? Why did we ever leave? They'll get nostalgic. They'll come back and they'll say, we should be one nation connected together, shouldn't we? And if they were to say, you know what, let's let bygones be bygones. Let's just join back and we'll be one nation. You have one nation, but how many kings? Yeah. How many kings does a nation need? One. What do you do with the superfluous guy? You kill him. This is all based on fear. That's all that this is. Jeroboam is scared for his life, which, by the way, why should he not be scared for his life? Because God sent a prophet to him and said, hey, I'm going to do this for you. That should be enough to where he wouldn't be scared for his life, but he is. And so he says, you know what, guys? It's way too much for you to have to go all the way down here to Jerusalem. Therefore, I'm going to give you an alternative. And therefore, he set up altars where? All right, Dan, where's Dan? Exactly, yep, right up here. And where's Bethel? Nailed it, yep, right there. It's just right on the other side of that line. I mean, it's really close to Jerusalem, is where Bethel is. And so he says, you know what? It's way too much for you to go all the way down there. Behold, these are your gods who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And again, as Kelly pointed out, we're connecting back to not the northern nation of Israel's first departure from serving God, but whose first departure from serving God? All right, the whole of Israel themselves in Exodus chapter 32, but then all of the aftermath, 32 through 34. So, this is really important to see these connections. They have departed. This is their golden calf moment. Do they recover? Why not? What do they not have? Huh? Well, it's the same God, but Exodus 32 and 1 Kings 12, what's the difference? What's that, Isaac? Okay, one was torn down, the other wasn't because of, did someone say it? Moses. In Exodus 32, they had Moses. There is no Moses figure that brings them back to what they're supposed to be here. So, because of that, they go into rebellion, the kind of rebellion that does Jeroboam's name ever show up again in the Old Testament? Again and again and again and again. Because every king, just about after him, in the northern nation of Israel, is going to be compared back to him. Whether they walked in the ways of Jeroboam and the sins in which he caused the people of Israel to sin. Even when you have a king that you're like, oh man, this one's a good one. Jehu, you know, he eradicated Baal worship within the northern nation. He's the one that took out the Ahab dynasty, and with Jezebel and all of that, put an end to all of that, and he got rid of all the prophets. This is the kind of guy that you're like, yes, finally, we've got a really good king up in the north who's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and even he is considered a failure. Why? Because he never tore down the high places that Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, had erected. He's a failure because of what Jeroboam does here. And this is a lasting legacy that goes all the way through the history of the northern nation of Israel until what finally happens to them. All right. They're taken into captivity is accurate, but to say taken into captivity, we kind of assume what? That they will come out of it. But do they? No. Who comes in, by the way, during this time? All right, the Assyrians come in, and they just take out the northern nation. Samaria itself is overthrown. And when they do so, by the way, what year is this? Okay, 721, 722, depending on the reckoning that you go by. And remember, ancient dates are not, there are some dates that are absolutely firmly fixed, but a lot of times depending how far away or how old it is, sometimes we're a year or two where we say, well, it's in this time frame. So 721, 722, I probably should flip that, 722, 721, since 722 comes first. But around in this time frame, they meet their demise. The people of Israel are rounded up, they're sent somewhere else. What else happens? it seems people are brought in, and those people are going to play a part. And the whole discussion later, in fact, they've been kind of playing a part in our Sunday morning discussions. The people of Samaria, Sanballat, Tobiah, these people are the remnants of what happened during this time frame. So, 720 to 721 BC, the northern nation of Israel comes to an end. How many good kings? Yeah, 0. Samuel? Okay. Okay. Yeah, eventually, yes, you're going to see that. In fact, even during the reign of Jeroboam, does anybody come and talk about how these high places are going to be torn down at some point? Yeah, there's that unnamed prophet, right, who comes in and who tells Jeroboam and prophesies to him. And what name does he even say is going to do it? Josiah. So Samuel's saying, yeah, Josiah's name is actually given during this account, the one who is eventually going to destroy, these high places. Absolutely. But he doesn't speak on behalf of this nation to correct them. All right, very good. So this is really ultimately the demise of the northern nation. No good kings. There's not even a whole lot to commend from that time period. We talked about Jehu. He seems to be kind of a bright spot during that time. But they give us such people as Ahab. And Ahab, by the way, is a huge figure. By the way, we talked about this in the Kings and Chronicles accounts. A lot of attention is given to Ahab and his dynasty, right? Does that mean that he was the strongest of the kings of the northern nation of Israel? No, politically, he's just kind of a blip on the radar. People don't even talk about Ahab. Who do they talk about during his time? Omri, his father. It's Omri's dynasty. Omri was the big guy. Omri was the powerful guy. Everybody knew who Omri was and all of the nations around them. He was the strong leader, and he gets hardly any bit of attention during the text because we focus on Ahab. Why is that? Okay, because Ahab's wife, Jezebel, is evil. And also what? Okay, the prophet's nemesis. This is, by the way, one of, I'm going to say this, and I hope that this is accurate. You may prove me wrong on this, but one of 3 basic time periods, I believe, during the life of Israel and their time, that you have prophetic, not prophetic, but like miraculous activity. You have it in their beginning, in the days of Moses, where you have the miraculous taking place. You have it during the time of Elijah and Elisha, where the miraculous is taking place. And then you have it at the very end, in the time of the New Testament, when the miraculous is taking place. There may be things that are kind of one-offs, like when they threw Samuel's body into a pit and, somebody rose at that point or came alive, or you may have just one-off type things, but a flurry of miraculous activity, like we see during the days of Elijah and Elisha, is a very, very rare occurrence through the biblical text. And it comes in at the point where Israel and even Judah, because of Israel's influence, are deep diving into some of the worst spiritual condition that they're going to be in. There's something very special about the time of Ahab and Jezebel, and then those that are corresponding down in Judah as well. that there's a lot of very negative, bad things taking place. And remember, the historical accounts that we have, what they say is if you want to know the history that's actually going on, go read the king's accounts. Go read the king's chronicles. That'll tell you. But what the biblical accounts are interested in is the spiritual evaluation of the people. Did they please God or did they not please God? Doesn't care how powerful they are, doesn't care how much money they had, doesn't care who's known or not known. The only thing that matters is, what did God think of them? And at this moment, this is going to be one of the worst points in their history. And I think that's why you see Elijah and then Elisha showing up during this time as well to help steer and bring out the people from this. All right, so Ahab is probably the worst. Ryan mentioned Jezebel, a name that's probably familiar to us, but there's just nothing really to commend from that time period. All right, so we move forward then in the south, and they're going to extend past this. Are things better in the south than they are in the north? Yeah. Do you have any good kings? Yeah. You have, depending on your reckoning and what you count and how you count it and all of that, 7, 8 kings that are given good spiritual evaluations at the end of their reigns. So there are some who are considered to be good kings. Name some of those. All right, Jehoshaphat, and we'll just kind of put him around in there. You have, though, a couple towards the end who are really good, right? Who are they? Okay, first one, Hezekiah. And can someone tell me around where Hezekiah reigns? That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, Hezekiah is the king around the time that the northern nation of Israel falls. He's in Jerusalem. In fact, it's Sennacherib's army, who Sennacherib kind of takes over after the fall of Samaria, all of that. And then he is advancing the armies further down. And does he threaten Judah and Jerusalem? Yes. And this is once again during that time of that you have the things going on, although I guess that's a little bit earlier. But what does he do? When the armies are surrounding Jerusalem, what does he do? He prays. Prays to God. And that night, what happened? Yeah, an angel came into the Assyrian camp, killed 185,000, so that when they woke up, they were all dead. Is kind of how it's listed. Yeah, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek to some degree, and it's one of those statements that you're supposed to read it, get a little bit of a chuckle out of it, and then realize the deep significance of it. 185,000 people in this army, so that those who weren't killed, when they wake up, they look around and they realize, what is their position now before Jerusalem? It's not nearly as strong as it used to be. So what do? They go home. They leave. They don't conquer. And by the way, all of this is sort of somewhat listed on Sennacherib's prism. Y'all remember talking about Sennacherib's prism? Anybody remember this? Yeah. This is where the king recounts all of his exploits and how he defeated this city and this city and this city and this city, and whooped up on all of them until he came to Jerusalem. And what happened in Jerusalem? What does it say he did? That's exactly right, Samuel. Good job. He says, Hezekiah, I shut up like a bird in a cage. Now, that sounds pretty positive, doesn't it? He's like, look what I did to Hezekiah. But if you read between the lines, what's he saying that he did not do to Hezekiah? Didn't squash him. Didn't conquer him. He laid a siege around. He shut him up like a bird in a cage, but that's the best he could do. That's all that he did before he left. And so in a roundabout way, Sennacherib's prism is actually verifying the truth of what the text of Scriptures tell us, that this is exactly the way that it is told. So you have Hezekiah, and then who was Hezekiah? Who comes after him? Man, I thought you guys would get this one. Manasseh, yes. Way to go, Ryan. Yep. After Hezekiah comes Manasseh, and he's a pretty good guy, right? No. About as bad as Ahab is in the north, Manasseh is that in the south. In fact, later on, when they try to do some reforms, it's going to be told that God is not going to relent on the punishment that he's bringing because of all the evil that Manasseh had done. Manasseh's reign was that bad. And he reigned for a really long time, too. After Manasseh, his son, what's his name? Amon, reigns for a lot less. Probably about 2 years before he's assassinated. And who takes his place? All right, this is where Josiah comes in. Josiah, good king, bad king? Good king. He's one of the best they got. And so you get then to the time frame of Josiah. And during the time of Josiah, what takes place? It's one of the first stories that's told about the reign of Josiah. Yeah, Ryan? I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. Say it again.
They find the scrolls,
Okay. What scroll?
the law,
Yeah.
and he has them read.
Yep.
Um,
And what happens then?
if I remember right, he tears his clothes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, more general though. Yeah, first of all, where do they find the book of the law? In the temple, probably where it's supposed to be. You know, they say, hey, I found this book of the law in a place that the book of the law is supposed to be. What does that tell us? Is it because they'd somehow set aside and lost the book? No, it's probably that they just quit going back to the book, and it had become lost to them. And so they had to go take a look at it, had it read before Josiah. He gets upset because he realizes in the book of the law, what does it say that God's going to do for people who go into idolatry? Pretty bad things, right? When you ignore the law itself and you ignore everything going on, bad things are going to happen. And so he inquires of the Lord and says, hey, what's going to happen? And what does the Lord tell him? Bad things. Yeah, he says, look, all of these things, they're going to come against Jerusalem. Because of the wickedness of your grandfather Manasseh and all that he did, all of these things are going to happen. They're going to come to Jerusalem. He says, Josiah, here's at least the bright spot for you. What? All right. You won't see it happen. You'll be dead by the time that this takes place, and this will happen to your children. So that was probably, oh man, if I'm getting I might be messing my dates up. It's a 2. I think it's 622 is when it's generally assumed that took place. And Josiah, in the year 609, what does he do? Okay, he challenges the Egyptian army. Do we know why? We really don't. All we know is that Pharaoh Necho was coming up through here, and he was bringing his army up, by the way, for what purpose? Help the Assyrians against the Babylonians. All right, and so that's all the battle that's taking place up at Haran and then Carchemish. Remember when we talked about the battles of Haran and Carchemish? By this time, Nineveh's fallen. The Assyrians they're basically on their way out. They've established Haran as their new capital. The Assyrians have, but the Babylonians are basically just kind of, taking care of business up there. The Egyptians are on their way up to help. Basically at Haran, the Egyptians are going to help them only so much that they are able to get out and flee from there to a place called Carchemish, which is a better battle area for them. And there the Egyptians and the Assyrians take a stand against the Babylonians. And who wins the battle of Carchemish in 605? The Babylonians. Decisive victory. Assyrians, gone. They're just wiped out completely. And now it's a matter of whether the Babylonians or the Egyptians are going to be the strong ones. All of this, what happens before all of that is that Necho leads his army up through here. And for whatever reason, Josiah, I'm almost positive, meets him at Megiddo, which seems to be just a good battleground place that people like to fight back then. Meets him at Megiddo, tries to cut him off. We don't fully know why. Maybe he felt as if they owed Babylon something. Maybe he just didn't like the Egyptians running through their land and thought he should stop it. Who knows? Maybe he just thought the Assyrians are the bad guys for what they did to the northern nation. We don't know. But he tries to stop it, and he dies in 609 in battle with the Egyptians. So, we talked about all the events that take place with Haran, Battle of Haran, Battle of Carchemish. After the Battle of Carchemish, the Egyptians flee, and the Babylonian army is coming after them, but going a little bit more slowly because they are making each place that they go through pay tribute and swear allegiance to the Babylonians. And do the Babylonians come in and create all kinds of change? No. They basically come in and say, look, y'all can do your thing. Just keep living how you live. Do what you do. Just pay tribute. That's all we ask. Just continue to pay your tribute to us, and we'll consider you part of our empire. We'll take care of you, protect you. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to take with us, what? All right. Some of the children of your elite, your nobles, your leaders. We're going to take some of those children. Why? What's the purpose? They're going to take them back to Babylon, which is over here. Sorry, it's off the map. When I wrote this, I didn't really think about the rest of it. So over here, right here, maybe up a little bit, probably around and right there, that's where Babylon itself is going to be. So they're going to take them all the way back over to here. And while they're there, hopefully, as Aaron said, indoctrinate them, probably put them through pro-Babylonian type of mind. What's the word I'm looking for? Indoctrination, yeah, I don't know this. Anyway, it's where you mess with their minds in some way. But yeah, indoctrination in order to make them pro-Babylon, so that eventually they could, this seems to be the idea, get them back to where they're from, and then they can be the leaders, the governors of those areas, being people who are pro-Babylon. It's a system that makes a whole lot of sense. Do they get a chance to do that with Jerusalem? Well, they take some young ones. Do they get a chance, though, to indoctrinate these young ones and replant them back over here to lead? No, they don't. And so what we have in 605, we have the very first time that people are taken away from Babylon. And things are actually okay for a few years until the people in Babylon do what? I'm sorry, the people in Jerusalem do what? They stop paying their tribute. They rebel. And they say, well, you know what? They're way over here. They're dealing with things. We can get away with this. Did they get away with it? No. Nebuchadnezzar comes back in what year? All right, around 597. By the way, did Nebuchadnezzar invade Egypt during this time? Why not? Because he got word over here in Babylon that his father had died. And since his father was dead, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the general of the armies, the next in line to take the throne, what does he have to do? He has to go back. So everything with Egypt is put on hold. He has to go back, secure his crown, take over as king. And then they come back in 597 over here when the people of Jerusalem, they decide to quit paying their tribute. So they come back over here. They take care of the king during this time. And they take him, back. But they also take whom? Okay. Well, Daniel and his friends were part of the 605, right? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All of those were in 605. Who's taken in this one? All right, skilled workers, the ones who are really wise in doing things, the best craftsmen, basically the people that it would be really meaningful to have. They take them from Jerusalem and carry them back to Babylon. Things go hunky-dory for them? No. Now the king, or the guy that they have put in place, in what year? 5 what? All right, in 587, they stop tribute one more time. This time Nebuchadnezzar's like, I'm done with you. So they come back, and what do? All right, raise the city, right? Walls down. Temple destroyed. King, what do they do with the king? Well, they don't kill him. They kill all of his sons in front of him, and then do what? Yep, they blind him. So that's the last thing that he ever remembers, and then they take him in captivity. And they're going to be captive for how long? All right. They will be captive for 70 years. All right, so for 70 years from 587, and the 70 years, we understand, we're not trying to do math here and try to find an exact, but it's going to be fairly close. But during that time frame, what's going on in Jerusalem? Is there anybody left? What's that? Yeah, there are some people left. In 587, they took almost everybody that was worth anything, gets taken, but they do leave some people behind to starve in Jerusalem and all of that. By the way, who gets left in particular? Jeremiah is left behind. 597, who was taken specifically? Ezekiel. And so during this time, God has a prophet, Daniel, with the king over Israel, which happens to be Nebuchadnezzar. He has a prophet among the people who are in exile, Ezekiel. And then he has a prophet left with those who remain behind, Jeremiah. So you have a 70-year time period before they're going to come out of their captivity, and they will be allowed to return. What takes place during that time that allows them to return? Okay. All right, so the Edict of Cyrus, but before that could happen, what? Ryan? No, it's going to be after this. Okay. Kathy? All right, the Medes and the Persians overthrow Babylon during this time. And so with Babylon gone, the Medes and the Persians, they kind of take over. They make an edict that allows people to return back to their lands from which they were taken, and helps and gives them funds to rebuild their temples and other major projects and things such as that. And so the people then are allowed to return. After they are allowed to return, now we have a series of stories that take place in chronological order. After the exile, whose story comes first? Remember, what stories do we have after the exile? After Chronicles, right? Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, right? So we still have those three stories that come after the exile. Which one chronologically is first? Esther. All right, so Esther comes first. So it's really Esther and Mordecai, their story, and we had some fun with that story because you're supposed to have fun with that story. That story is first and foremost meant to be a part of the Purim festival. And so we had some fun with that, but you have not only Esther, but then Ezra, and then Nehemiah. And these really, Ezra focuses on the rebuilding of the temple, the return, the rebuilding of the temple, and a refocus on the law itself. And then you have the time of Nehemiah, which focuses on the rebuilding of the walls, as we've been talking about on Sunday mornings. And so it's probably during this time that they begin to compilate what things? What writings do we have in our Bibles? Okay, the Chronicles, yes, are probably put together during this time. Remember, the King's accounts were before, but the Chronicles accounts are written later, which is why, by the way, the Chronicles accounts are in the writings portion of the Tanakh, whereas the King's accounts they place in the prophets portion, because they recognize that the King's accounts were part of that historical prophets writings that lead up through there. So the Chronicles, but what else? The Psalms. This is probably when the Psalms are compiled together. That doesn't mean, does that mean this is when the Psalms are written? No, the Psalms have been written all the way back through here, right? Even going so far back as Moses, who wrote a psalm. But this is probably when they found the different books of Psalms and put them together, the 5 books, into a single psalter. Probably took place during this time. Some think that maybe this is probably when the Proverbs, which is a bunch of pieces that they put the Proverbs together. Again, does it mean that the Proverbs were written here? No, not at all. Proverbs go pretty far back. But it's just during this time, they're spending a lot of time trying to compile things and get them, doing redaction or editing on certain things. And so all of this during this time is leading up to the finalization of the canon of the Hebrew Bible. All of this to point out, and this brings us, by the way, we're bringing this to a conclusion as far as our review is concerned. So when we get back from our trip, the plan is to move forward and start talking about things that happen between what we call the Old and New Testament. But how does the King's account end? Anybody remember how the King's account ends? It's a really kind of a weird ending. after it talks about, the taking the last of the king Zedekiah and killing his kids and cutting out his eyeballs and then taking him prisoner. Yeah, Joshua? Ooh, very good, Joshua. That's exactly right. Because it looks like the promise of the what? From the very beginning. Even before that, the promise of the seed. The seed starts back here in Genesis chapter 3. Enmity between your seed and her seed, right? Genesis 3:15. You have the promise of the seed, and it flows through Abraham, the promise of the seed. And that's the same seed that flows through 2 Samuel chapter 7. You have the promise of the seed. And it's that very same promise that gives life to our fifth key passage, which is what? Jeremiah chapter 31, in which God promises that there will be a new what? I will have a new covenant with the house of Jacob and with the house of Israel. Actually, I think it says with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Unlike the covenant that I made before, a covenant which they broke, in this one there will be, you won't have to teach each neighbor to know his brother, for they will all know the Lord, from least of them to the greatest. And I will also forgive their sins and remember their iniquities no more. That's promised here. But that hope, where does it come from? Does it come from the law? Does it come from Moses? The priest? No. This, like Joshua said, it looks like the seed promise has died, doesn't it? The last king is dead, his kid, or at least he's taken, all of his kids are dead, his line is gone. Has the seed finished? And then you just have this, it's exactly right, Joshua. No, because there's this tiny extra little blurb that says, oh yeah, by the way, Jehoiakim was raised out of his position in the prison. He was given a seat at the table of the king, and he was given special treatment. In other words, you're reminded, oh yeah, that's right. There's still one more king. The seed is not dead. There is still hope. And that is the hope that gives us the new covenant, and that's the hope that brings us to what we call the New Testament. So, yes.
Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel was the father of Ehud. On Zerubbabel, the grandson of Jeconiah, is the one who brings the first group back.
Yep.
They go out in three groups, they come back in three
Yep.
groups. So where does he...
Oh, Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is going to be, is I believe, around the time frame of Ezra, with Zerubbabel, Joshua, during that time. And by the way, there's meaning to all of that as well. Joshua, if you were to say Joshua in the Aramaic of the first century, what would that sound like? Yeshua. And put it in English. Jesus. The name Joshua is the name Jesus, and he becomes kind of a blending of, Zerubbabel, Joshua during this time frame, moving forward, the salvation that's coming through them. Yeah, absolutely. That's the one that is under discussion during that time frame. And so, as they've come out, you have the line of the seed as it continues. I don't want to give any spoilers as far as where that line's going to end. I don't want to let you guys know already that it's Jesus that's being talked about, so I won't give any spoilers at the moment that that's where this is all leading to. But just as Lorraine just said, there's a reason that these names are there at the beginning of Matthew. These names have meaning, significance, and power. This is the path of the seed that ran through Abraham, that ran through David, and it culminates in Jesus the Christ. So, all right, we're a little bit over time. Sorry about that, but I wanted to get through this and talk about all of that. There are some things I wanted to talk about that we just didn't get to. Some things probably you remember that you're wondering why we didn't talk about. And, well, this is a review, so we weren't covering necessarily everything. But we're going to be gone next Sunday, next 2 Sundays actually. And then after that, we will hopefully be able to go into what we call generally the intertestamental time period.